Hi, Jamie Cowen here to continue the series of a different way of looking at politics. The idea is to examine relevant and sometimes controversial public policy issues from a biblical perspective absent the typical partisan rancor. Today, the topic is immigration, walls and cases and illegals, oh my. You see, immigration brings out the best and the worst in people. Many community organizations seek to help immigrants, but unfortunately, many politicians use immigrants as whipping posts, creating a frenzy and causing fear among voters that their jobs are at stake or their culture will be replaced. Immigration is very personal to me. My grandparents were immigrants to the United States, fleeing the persecution of Jews in Russia. My whole family are immigrants to Israel. When I was the rabbi of our congregation in Virginia, we assisted most of the Russian immigrants to our city. We had immigrants in our congregation, both legal and illegal. And for the past 27 years, I've been an immigration lawyer representing both legal and illegal immigrants. Suffice to say that immigration is an extremely complex subject, especially when it comes to public policy. Most studies have shown that immigrants enhance societies. It's certainly true of the United States and Israel, whose populations are predominantly immigrants or descendants of immigrants. But on the other hand, there must be restrictions and limitations in place to prevent countries from being overrun by potentially millions of migrants. War, collapsing states, climate change, water shortages, and increasing income inequality likely will cause increases in global migration for the foreseeable future. So, how shall we view immigrants? And what kind of policies should exist to manage immigration? Interestingly, the Bible has a lot to say about immigrants. In the Hebrew Bible, the word for immigrant is ger, usually translated as a foreigner or a stranger. Did you know that Abraham, the father of our faith, was an immigrant? Abraham himself admitted this when seeking to purchase property to bury his wife Sarah. And even God declared him an immigrant when promising the land of Israel to Abraham and his descendants. In fact, the word immigrant or foreigner is mentioned 87 times in the Bible. Here's a few examples. From Exodus 23. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner or immigrant, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Leviticus 19. The foreigner or immigrant residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Wow, that's a smack in the face to a nativist spirit consuming much of the world today. In Deuteronomy 24, when you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Deuteronomy 27. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the orphan, or the widow. Psalm 146. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the widow and the orphan. In the books of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the nation of Israel is condemned for its treatment of the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. Isn't it interesting how the terms foreigner, orphan, and widow are conflated in the Bible? Why? Because they are the most vulnerable members of society. How these are treated reflects the level of justice in society. But unlike the orphan or the widow, the foreigner is often deemed a threat to society. The Jewish people know this well. Throughout much of their history, Jews were invited into nations to bring knowledge and wealth. However, later as they prospered, they were perceived as threats culturally, religiously, and economically. Restrictions were then imposed upon them, and often they were expelled or killed even up through the middle of the 20th century. While the United States has been the most welcoming nation in history towards immigrants, its relationships to immigrant groups is a mixed bag. African Americans, Chinese, Irish, Italians, Poles, Jews, Japanese, Arabs, Latinos, and others have faced various restrictions, discrimination, or even persecution. During the past administration, President Trump castigated immigrants of all types and applied some of the most restrictive immigration regulations in 100 years. And yes, while it's true, swarms of migrants have flooded the southern border over many years, causing a complete breakdown of immigration policy. The answer is not walls and cages, but rather an overhaul of immigration law that accommodates legal immigration and those fleeing persecution. Reasonable legislation was proposed during the Obama administration and passed by the Senate with Republican support, but was blocked in the House of Representatives. As a practitioner of immigration law, I can tell you categorically that the system is broken and needs an overhaul. There are millions of illegal immigrants in the United States today, many of whom have been in the United States for years, have families, work jobs, go to college. For the most part, illegal immigrants don't skirt physical barriers to entry into the United States, but rather enter ports of entry and claim asylum or enter on tourist visas and overstay those visas. Should all these people just be rounded up and tossed out? You might say, well, they entered illegally. They need to pay the price. But is that what the Bible says? In fact, the book of Ephesians contains a fascinating passage about immigrants and citizenship, as the Apostle Paul discusses how Gentiles are brought into covenant with God through the Messiah. Quoting him, "Remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth, you were separated from Messiah, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenant of promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now, through Yeshua the Messiah, you once who were far away have been brought near through the blood of Messiah." Now, of course, Paul's not talking about national immigration policy, but he highlights the conditions and feelings of those who are foreigners and who are excluded from the rights and privileges of the first class, so to speak. He shows that a new policy has been implemented that resolves the division between the insider and the outsider accomplished through the Messiah. For those who have never been to a citizenship naturalization ceremony in the United States, I strongly recommend attending. The ceremony involves the citizen applicant renouncing allegiances to their old status and accepting the responsibility and privileges of the new. The process reminds me of accepting Yeshua as Messiah, where we discard the old life and take on a new life in the Messiah. So the Bible really does emphasize the issues of the immigrant or foreigner and how they should be treated. Going back to the case of Abraham, when he sought to buy a burial plot for his wife, the tribal leader of the area actually wanted to give him the plot. Again, I'm not suggesting there be no rules or regulations on immigration. Rather, God's way is a way of justice and mercy. Look, I worked in Congress. I was involved in incredibly complex and comprehensive legislation. Yet we found a way to compromise and strike deals whose product has worked well for over 30 years. Certainly, we as followers of Yeshua should demand just and merciful solutions for the most vulnerable in society, which includes immigrants, both legal and illegal. Will we succumb to the drumbeat of hatred, exclusion, and fear, or will we rise to the occasion and protect the foreigner and do what is right in the eyes of the Lord? It doesn't have to be walls and cages and illegals, oh my. It doesn't have to be suspicion and name-calling. There are just and merciful solutions. We just need to commit to find and support them. Thank you, and see you next time.